Getting closer.
Okay, so I think, well, let me check in with Eric real quick because I know
Yes.
you're probably able to see things on your end that I cannot. Do you feel that most who are experiencing some difficulty with the link have been able to get on, or are you still receiving emails from folks experiencing some challenges?
It looks like we have just about everyone. Maybe the last one. I don't know if I see Mucha in yet.
Oh, I just see Nucha now. Yes.
Oh, good. Okay, that should be the last one, and we should have a full meeting now. We have 32 participants.
Okay, great. Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Eric. And sometimes these technical issues happen. So
Yes.
thank you all for your patience. If you were waiting in this space, thank you. And if you were struggling with the link, thank you for your patience as navigating some of those IT issues that can happen. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Early Learning Advisory Council meeting. Maybe next slide. I think everyone is pretty familiar with these virtual meeting protocols. But please, mute yourself unless you're speaking or responding to a question. We always have dedicated time throughout the meetings for Q&A, but also feel free to use the chat to post questions or comments at any time during any presentation. And if you are experiencing any technical difficulties, reach out to the CE team. They are great. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we're going to do this for the purposes of time in chat, but if everyone could just take a moment to introduce themselves through the chat, put your name, where you're located, and your role, and we'll just take a minute or two to do that. That would be great. Great, I see folks are introducing themselves now. Let's take another minute. Wonderful to see so many people here today. Great. So I'm just going to keep moving along since we did get a little bit of a late start, but please continue to introduce yourselves in the chat. But what we're going to do next is just take a few minutes to review the minutes from the last meeting. So it looks like copies of the June ELAC meeting minutes were just placed in the chat, and they were also sent out a little bit in advance, for you to review. If you can click on that link, and maybe we'll just take a few minutes now to allow some time just to review those minutes, and then we will see if there are any questions before we take a vote on those minutes. So let's take a few minutes right now to review the minutes from the June meeting. And maybe Jessica, if you can put that link back in the chat one more time. Thank you. I'm going to give about 1 more minute for everyone to review those June ELAC meeting minutes, and then we'll move on to seeing if there are any questions and take a vote. Okay, hopefully everyone had the opportunity to review the minutes. Are there any questions that anyone has about the minutes from the June meeting? Okay, it looks like there aren't any questions, and I don't see any questions in the chat. And Eric, if I missed anything, please let me know. But it looks like we can now move forward to vote on the June meeting minutes. And as a reminder, only ELAC members and regional advisors vote. So let's move forward to place your vote in the chat. You can indicate thumbs up, thumbs sideways, meaning you can live with what you've read, or thumbs down if you have any objectives. And it's absolutely fine to write your vote in the chat if you do not have a symbol to use. Oh, it looks like there is, oh, I thought there was, nope, there is not a question. Okay, so let's move forward with voting at this time. And Eric, maybe you can let me know when you've captured the vote to signal when I can move on.
Yeah, you bet. I'm adding as we go. That would be 16 yay votes.
And I see,
and a couple more. I think that would be a majority. of ELAC members.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you everyone for taking time to vote. Now we're going to move on and talk a little bit about the feedback loop. And thank you, Jessica, for placing the feedback loop in the chat. The feedback loop is an example of one of the standing items that we have at ELAC meetings. It's a way to provide updates and follow up on questions that have been raised during previous ELAC meetings. And Jessica did just place a link to the feedback loop in the chat. So if you can take a minute to take a look at that, we can also walk through it really quickly here, and I'll share some highlights. But contained in the feedback loop are some updates related to the FSKA recommendations report. And this piece of feedback is because there was a little bit of confusion about the types of reports that have been coming out, and hopefully this adds a bit of clarity. But DCYF has worked with ELAC to develop 2 different recommendation reports related to Senate Bill 5237, the Fair Start for Kids Act. And so those 2 different reports are the FSKA Temporary Licensing Subcommittee Recommendation Report and the FSKA ELAC Recommendation Report. And then there's some brief descriptions in the feedback loop to describe the distinction between those reports. Also in the feedback loop, you'll see information about the ELAC charter. The charter has been approved, and there's an updated version now on the ELAC webpage. There is feedback in response to a question that was raised about Washington State employee vaccination mandate. And then finally, you'll see in the feedback loop information about the ELAC Executive Committee, and there is an open co-chair position. I think everyone's aware of that. It's been open for quite some time since Shelley had to step away from that seat. So if there is interest, please review the description and reach out to the community engagement team if you have interest. So I will stop there. I see Eric, you've unmuted. Are there?
Yeah, I'd like to maybe add a little clarification to the 2 reports. The TLS report is a recommendation report to DCYF, and the FSKA ELAC recommendation report is a recommendation report to the legislature. So just another way to kind of differentiate the 2 of those reports. I don't know if that was clear in our feedback there.
Great. Thank you, Eric, for adding that. That's very helpful. Susan, you have a question?
Yeah, so based on that, is there a way though that we could get legislators informed about the recommendations to DCYF? I raised this because they did a tour stop yesterday at Kids Co at Graham Hill, and people really didn't know about it. And there's so many good recommendations in that report for legislators to be aware of, that I think we should put a plan together and a communication thing to inform legislators about that report and what's in it.
Thank you, Susan. I believe, yes, that is the case. Actually, this report itself many of the recommendations from that will kind of fill into other areas. Yes, she is talking about the TLS report. Yes. And so we'll just make sure and look into it. But the, I guess, long answer is yes, it will be to some degree.
Well, full disclosure, I've already shared the link with the LEAP staff to make sure, because they were, they wanted to know more about it, and they will probably be engaged in informing legislators about the report and the recommendations in it as well, just so you know.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Thanks, Susan.
Great. Thank you, Susan, and thank you, Eric, for fielding that question. Other questions about the feedback loop? Want to make sure I didn't miss anything in the chat. Nope. Okay. Great. Well, if there are no other questions, maybe we'll move on to the state agency and partner and regional coalition updates. And I'll start with the state agency and partner updates. And thank you, Jessica, for putting the link in the chat. This is an example of another standing item at ELAC meetings. Oftentimes this is sent out in advance, but we also place the link in the chat so you can take a look at those updates. You will find updates from DCYF in this document, as well as updates from the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction and the Department of Health this time around. And I believe there may also be representatives here from OSPI and DOH in attendance who might be able to answer questions that you have about those updates that you see in the document. I'll give everyone a minute or so just to take a look at that, and then I'll check in to see if there are any questions related to it. Thank you, Eric, for providing that update that DSHS has sent in some updates and that we will get them in a follow-up email. Great. So are there any questions or comments about the state agency and partner updates that you've received?
Enrica, I had a question. Sorry, I came on a little late. This is ET's from Launch. I'm reading the feedback loop and about the Washington State employee vaccine mandate. Was it ever an official WAC? My HR department is still a little confused about that.
I am going to have to turn that. Thank you. That's a great question. And I'm going to look to Eric maybe for some feedback to that question.
I was wondering if you were going to look to me. I do not know that answer, and I don't know if we have anybody here in the room that can give you the right answer on that. If there is, I'm not sure if we have a DCYF staff that can. We'll make sure and follow up on that.
Okay,
for
that'd
sure.
be great.
Yeah, absolutely.
They need to see that the WAC has been rescinded in order for my HR department to lift that mandate.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Great. Thank you for that question. And thank you, Eric, for addressing that. Other questions? Okay, so if there are no other questions, we'll move on and talk about the regional coalition updates. And these are examples. Again, it's another standing item, gives opportunity for the regions to share updates when they have them. You know, there are a number of representatives here from the regions. As you're reviewing those updates, I'd also like to extend an invitation to any of the regional advisors if they have additional information that they'd like to share about activities that are occurring in the respective regions. Please feel free to unmute and share or add those updates in the chat. Great. Thank you, Brittany, for that update in the chat. That sounds pretty exciting to have a lot of new folks and new roles, and it'll be great to see the updates that you have to share at our meeting in October. Any other feedback from any of the regions? And also you'll notice in that document that there is an update, Washington Communities for Children update. I'm not sure if, just want to check in with Colleen real quick if she's back, just to see if there are any updates like to share as it relates to Washington Communities for Children, or WCFC. Okay, so if there are no other updates to share or questions, I'm going to turn it over to Lois, and we're going to take some time to talk about temporary licensing subcommittee tracker.
Hi, thank you very much, Enrica, and good morning, everyone. I just, for those who may not know, the tracker includes recommendations for the FSK Temporary Licensing Committee, Subcommittee Recommendations Report. Susan Brown had touched on that a little bit earlier. And the report was submitted to DCYF, Department of Children, Youth and Families, in November 2022. It's a living document that is updated and shared during each ELAC meeting to track progress and next steps. It's also on the website as well. And so Elisa is here from the DCYF Child Care Licensing, Quality Assurance, and Continuous Quality Improvement area. She is a manager there, and she's going to provide updates on the recommendations. And the recommendation numbers we're going to talk about today are 1, 4, 23, and 36. And it looks like Jessica has placed the link to the document in the chat for those who need access to it. And then she's also going to ask about additional feedback or questions related to the tracker. So I will turn it over to her. Thank you.
Thanks, Lois. Hello, everyone. My name is Alizia Ear. I'm with the Child Care Licensing Division at DCYF. I had the pleasure and honor of being involved in the development of the recommendations report, sitting in on those conversations, and then also helping to continue the conversations on how we can implement and provide transparency from the licensing division on the parts that we are able to make moves on. I just want to acknowledge that over the last month, we were unable to make some edits to this document. So the version you have now, we're going to be making some edits which will reflect my verbal comments today, as well as some updates from our last meeting that we didn't get a chance to put in there. Also, we do cover the tracker and the recommendations report with the provider supports subcommittee. And so I will note when we are having further conversations or more detailed conversations with that group, and we'll put updates from the next meeting. I can't remember the date if anybody does. It's soon. But after that meeting, then we will send out a new updated version with any additional notes from this call and the next provider supports meeting. On August 9th. Thanks, Erin. Yeah, so to start us off, we have been focusing on some of the items that were identified as high priority by both ELAC and the Provider Support Subcommittee. Number one is related to general language access planning, which the Department of Children, Youth, and Families is engaging in as a department-wide effort right now. So there are some things that the licensing division is doing, and then there are larger efforts overall. So with the process for providers to request translations, the licensing division has created an instruction, like one-pager in multiple languages that we have just finalized. And so we will be to at least start off with including them in any legal letters that get sent to providers. And we are also now exploring how to make that information available upfront at the pre-licensing like part of interacting with the licensing division. So that is forthcoming because we do applications and have things online. I think you can imagine that software development and changes take a little bit of extra planning. So that is why that is taking a little bit longer. We are also, I discussed this at the last provider supports meeting with that group. But we are also going to be making some improvements to how the licensing division collects language access needs data. We are now also working with partners who are advocates for the Spanish and Somali speaking communities from other partners like Child Care Aware, who are working together on a glossary of terms so that when we make translations, we are making sure we're saying the same things. And also so that we can be just very intentional about asking for language access needs data like interpretation or translation services, whether like spoken or written, in a way that is appropriate and nuanced in that way as well. We don't currently ask that question in our application process, but we are looking to. So that is also work that is underway. And to just make aware from the DCYF-wide efforts, we have a new contract with translation services. And so instructions for DCYF staff on how to access interpreter and translation services has also just been given. So you should see, folks should see that start to trickle out in how DCYF interacts with all of our clients, not just childcare providers. So those are the verbal updates for number one. Are there any questions or comments, additional talking points on that, folks? Okay. Well, if anything comes up, please feel free. And like I said, we will make sure to get those updates written into the tracker that we'll send out after the August 9th meeting with provider supports.
Lisa, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead, Debbie.
I just have a clarifying question. So we're talking about translation and I think and interpreting. So would that interpreting be available when licensors are going out to, to visit a site? Okay. And all right, because we just have run into some issues with that with some of the Hispanic providers that we have, and some of the terminology the one that comes to mind is the word violation, and a violation with, when there's something that happening, that something they need to improve or change, that it's the term violation has well, a different has been having a serious connotation to those providers. And so I'm just also thinking about the terminology that we use and kind of what the goal is for improvement and to get better. So I just wanted to throw that out there. And thank you for clarifying that for me.
Thank you, Debbie. That's a really good point. And I will pass on that particular example to the folks working on the glossary of shared terms as well. That's a good call.
Elisa, is that something that would have to be changed throughout WAC? Is that something that would require, is it as simple as a language change is my question.
Changing the English word violation. I would have to check. It might be an RCW. But that doesn't mean that we can't adjust what word it's being translated into necessarily when working with childcare providers or on translated documents.
Thank you.
Okay. So I also want to verbally acknowledge that we did not make updates to number 4, which we did discuss last time. Some of those notes were captured in the meeting minutes and feedback loops, so we have to transpose those onto the tracker. And to just acknowledge that we also then had a discussion with Nicole Rose and Ruben Breves, generally talking about DCYF's engagement with the childcare provider communities. And so that work is ongoing, with plans being made to incorporate that feedback into early learning division as well as licensing division practices. I do also just want to note for folks that in the licensing division, we're doing a little bit of leadership restructuring. And so we are hiring a area administrator position for King County and shifting some other responsibilities around. So as we make those changes, then we will have people in licensing leadership positions on an area or regional level able to then start integrating into some of those regional conversations, which is what the feedback from last time was, that we extend the conversations from these statewide ones into the regional level as well. And I just want to note that, prior to the pandemic, that was a great practice. And so I think everyone's actually really excited to get back to more in-person regional stuff. So just figuring out how to do that again. Still coming out of some big social changes. So that's that update. And then I also wanted to note for number 23, which was around including staff names in childcare check. So we did reach out to Region 10, to the federal government, for guidance on that. And we did receive confirmation that we do not have to include full names in the notes that do end up on childcare check. And so what we are doing now in the licensing division is reviewing practice, and it gets a little technical, but the ways that we take notes and then how those populate different reports. Just looking at changes to that practice, just clarifying exactly what we're going to do, and then we have to change a lot of our internal policies and procedures documents. So that is upcoming, but has not been changed yet. We're still figuring out the details of that. And regarding number 36, so this was a specific request about the internal review panel. It took us a little bit of time, but we realized that there were different names for the same thing being used, or different things being used. There's the community review panel and then the internal review committee. So we've sorted through that. And actually, we're going to be having a much deeper dive and deeper conversation about that specific topic at the provider supports meeting on the 9th. And so in the next iteration of the tracker, you'll see much more detail about that. So we are making progress there. Are there any questions or other comments on these topics? Any questions or comments on any of the other parts of the tracker? Oh, thank you, Lois, for putting the text of the recommendations in the chat. I could have been reading them out loud and I didn't. My apologies.
We still do have about 10 minutes. Wondering if anyone would like take the opportunity. We have Alicia here with us. Obviously specific to the TLS report itself, but if there is some deep question that you've been really wanting to ask, we would honestly love to hear it. This would be a really great time to make sure that we find a very efficient way to use the tracker, both for getting you all information in a timely manner, and then also considering, our resources and our ability to update this document as quickly as we may need to. So we do have some time. I reopen the room to any questions for Alicia.
Eric, this is Susan. So I'm wondering if there's any interest or willingness to maybe have, how we have the temporary licensing subcommittee. Maybe it would be good to resurrect the subcommittee or create another subcommittee to work with DCYF as responses to the recommendations are being developed. That way, providers who gave the recommendations can also be part of how the solutions are coming about or not. It's a thought, a wondering that I'm having.
That's a good thought. Honestly, that makes a lot of sense. I think that would be something I would like to open up back to maybe Enrique and Lois or members, and maybe see if you all see any value in revisiting the actual TLS group itself and focusing now, of course, on the tracker itself and maybe the way that DCYF is able to kind of integrate some of that and again, make sure it goes somewhere or we have a response for you. Anyone?
I think that's a conversation that we can definitely have. I think the key would be too with Elisa and team as far as capacity and how you are scheduling those meetings and that type of thing, so that if members who are interested could participate in those conversations. So I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but that would be the biggest question, especially when you were heavily involved in those conversations before. So what is the process now? I guess the question is, Susan, if I'm for working on each of the items, and where, at what stage or what step can providers be involved in those conversations?
Well, it may not need to be a new group, but maybe it's something where the executive committee, we do a lot of share outs and report outs, and rather than, that maybe there's a way to incorporate with people who are already engaged in the process, like, so I guess what I'm trying to prevent is the check boxes being marked that they were answered or done, but we don't really know the details in between about how it came about. And I know we don't know all of it, or should know, maybe there's a reason why we shouldn't know all of it, but I feel like the more transparency with how decisions are made, the more understanding we'll have for why the decisions were made the way that they were, versus how things many times are now with a mandate without a lot of understanding of what's happened behind the scenes or how we got there, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Susan. I know from a CE perspective that reopening that subcommittee wouldn't necessarily be an effective use of, I think, of making sure that the trackers, is being tracked properly. So I think this is maybe a conversation that we maybe are able to develop out a little more in the provider supports meeting next week on August 9th. We do have that topic on there. We do have Alicia back. And as well, we do have a few other licensing topics that kind of relate to the tracker a bit. So that would maybe be an appropriate time to have a little more information brought in. And then I think after that, we'll make sure that this path and how we're using this is kind of brought forward again. Yes, Senator Wilson, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I've been having this conversation, and every time I talk, I learn. And one of the things that's interesting, the difference between, say, rulemaking and negotiated rulemaking, and sometimes there's a little bit of a difference between that. And sometimes, and we do a lot of negotiated rulemaking within legislation. It's written out that way, but in other places, it's not identified as negotiated, and then it's then really it's the WAC, and it's kind of how the agency engages. And so sometimes it is legislated and sometimes not. And I didn't really realize that when I was working with another group, and I realized in DCYF and in our work in this sphere, we do a lot more of negotiated rulemaking. And I know the group kinds of things take time. And so sometimes there's things that are like just business that aren't really, there's no flexibility. It's kind of how things are done. And that's oftentimes more just rulemaking rather than the negotiated pieces. And I don't know, Susan, if that helps, but boy, it helped me. And trying to figure out again where the sphere of influence is when you're giving input. Sometimes you see it, and then sometimes you give input and you don't see it at all, and you're wondering what happened to the conversations. And I know just for me, it was it's always trying to figure out kind of what kind of rulemaking we're doing or what kind of decisions are being made. Anyway, just thought I would add that.
All right, thank you very much, Senator Wilson. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that similarly, I'm just reflecting on that depending on the recommendation, how the partnership would work would look different if it does require legislation or funding decisions, or if it's something that we can implement with our current capacity and resources. So just to note that I don't think that it would be a one-size-fits-all process for partnership with all recommendations, and we'd have to think through more of that. I know that we are leaning into collaboration in this space and in the provider supports meeting. Also recognizing that there's limited capacity of providers to engage with us. And so we also don't want to delay our work and want to be able to show movement and progress in between meetings. So those are just some of the things that we'll consider. And so I guess I would say if there are particular ones that ELAC members would like more information about, please feel free to let us know that, and then we can be prepared to bring more information and potentially the other people working on it, because it's not all just me. Although I am the person here giving the updates, I might not be the best person to give the full details sometimes either.
Okay, thank you. Susan, does that answer your question, or do any other members have any questions on this piece?
Yeah, it does, Lois. I think that, if there's, what I would like is just so that if there are things that require legislative action, that providers may want to do that. So rather than DCYF saying, no, we're not going to do it because it requires legislative action, what if it's so important that we would want to take that route? So maybe it's getting back to those priority, like what are the ones that we think are so significant that will turn the tide for sustainability, so on and so forth. Then those are the ones that we want to be more engaged in the recommendations than perhaps others. So I think there's a possibility of doing it that way as well. So thank you. I appreciate you taking the time to go over the different parameters connected to all the work that you do. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. You have anything else to add before we wrap up this section?
No, just that it's good to see everyone again. Nice to be here.
All right, thank you very much. I know
Actually, Lois, I'm sorry, this is Nancy. I have
Oh,
my
go ahead,
I have my
Nancy.
double mutes on again, and I was trying to talk.
No problem.
So I actually have a thought. I had it, sir. No. Anyway, as I'm looking at some of these responses, I'm thinking on, I think it would be, I have to see the number. It's actually at the top of page 5, where when the response is given, the WAC is outlined in number, and then
to figure out a way to
and then
make it go back up.
number 7, there it says RCW WAC, dictated by RCW WAC. I'm wondering if it's possible to like always give kind of the numbers, so that, because there are people, there are times I've heard and probably said myself, oh, well, they say no to that because they're saying it's an RCW, but I don't really know how to go check that out and read it myself to say, oh yeah, it's right, they can't do this, right? So I'm wondering if there's a way to always, and I'm not going to always do that research, but it does give people time to do the research.
We absolutely can, and I think that request has been made before, and so I don't know why that information hasn't gotten into this version, but we will absolutely make sure that it's included in the next version.
Yeah, I wanted to add on to that. We did add the hyperlinks where they were applicable, but if you're catching any recommendations that are missing that, please bring that to our attention.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much, Nancy. And excuse me, you guys, I'm suffering with a bug today. So thank you so much for coming and sharing out. Appreciate it. So we're supposed to take a break now and then come back. There is a time for you to complete the meeting reflection survey, but I also wanted to give, if Senator Wilson has the time, I know I'm curious, and I'm sure some of you are, for those who might be on the phone. She was sharing out that Senator Wilson, Rep. Sin, and Rep. Kellen were invited to the White House to discuss childcare policy a few weeks ago. And there was a group of about 90 legislators who had done childcare policies within their states, and they were invited. And the areas of focus were access, affordability, and workforce. And then she also had a chance to meet with Senator Murray. So we are supposed to take a break now for those who might want to stay on. If Senator Wilson doesn't have to take a break, I would love to hear a little bit about that. If you feel like sharing out, Senator Wilson, I know I'm putting you on the spot, but can't pass up what you wrote in the chat without being curious.
Happy to do whatever. So I put it in there because I didn't want to take time, because I know there's so many important things. But if anybody has questions or wants to know more, happy to stick aboard while folks take a break.
Well, maybe I'm the only one, and that's okay.
I'm curious too, sorry. I was looking for the button. I'm curious.
Okay, I hear some people. So just share out a little bit, Senator Wilson, just, what the conversation was, some of the things that you might have shared with them, because I know you have lots of conversations with parents as well as providers. We just want to know, were you walking softly and carrying a big
Yeah, no, it was fascinating, because I too, I've seen the White House only from looking through the gates. So when you get an email that invites you to, as an advocate for your state, you get an email from the White House, how can you say no? So, I think I will forever keep the email that said that my credentials had been approved from the White House. And so the three of us went, and as I said in the notes, joined a group of 90 legislators altogether from various states across the nation. And really, President Biden had done Build Back Better, which didn't get all the way through, and they continue to have conversations around childcare, because we know it is economic recovery, and we won't have economic recovery unless we actually look at workforce from the perspective of who's been impacted the most from the pandemic, especially, and that is women. And in particular, when you look at, it doesn't matter what state you're from or where you live, you have been impacted. And so the three areas that they really were looking at from the White House perspective was accessibility, affordability, and access. And as a state, we've spent many years ahead of many others working on quality. And so what was interesting is I had a very difficult time separating those three things and having separate conversations, because they all kind of go together in my mind. But what happened was we were invited in. First Lady Biden joined us, and as well as all the senior advisors to the president related to economic recovery and related to childcare and childcare policy, and shared with us what they knew and what their thinking was. And then we were in small groups of legislators and had opportunity to talk together around those three areas, and then came back together. And I was able to, I was selected to stand and share, and the area I talked about was affordability and access. Again, you couldn't do one without the other. Rep. Sen also was selected to report back to the group. And the president and the advisors will be using that as they kind of craft and look at, how we're going to bring childcare into the fold, if you will, especially when we think about living wages, not just to survive, but to thrive. as a profession. And so it was really just informing them of what states were doing, things that were working, things that we needed to pay attention to, things we did not want them to go backwards in. We heard a lot of states are going backwards in quality in order to open up. And that is not necessarily something we want to do. We want to maintain safe spaces for our young people, and we want to increase accessibility. And then we then late afternoon spent a good deal of time with Senator Murray in her secret little space in the Capitol. She has a whole wing there now because she is currently the Senate President pro tem. So she's got quite a bit of power and privilege, if you will, and met with her and her staff and was really excited to hear that they're using Fair Start for Kids kind of as their architecture, as she's crafting the things that she'd like to see put forward in childcare. One of the big deals all the way across the board is no more than 7% of any individual's income would go toward the cost of care. But with Senator Murray, we had a lot of time to talk about, the CBDG grants, around flexibility, around professional development, around how we want to maintain our ability as a state to put money from the feds where we think it should go, and to keep our system moving forward and not have so many tight reins around how money is spent, so we're not able to push our system forward, so we can't make it ours. You know, oftentimes federal money comes with so many strings that oftentimes it's hard to fit it into a plan if it's a little different than what somebody says they want you to do. So we want to maintain quality, we want increased flexibility, and always resources and money, which Senator Murray is always willing to put forward. So anyway, just talked a lot about that, and you know, the whole profession of childcare and salary and benefits and how important that is, and the impact that the pandemic's had. And the other piece is not just looking at birth to 5, but looking at our cross-system, cross-sector work, and childcare goes into the K-12 system, and we're talking kids up through the age of 13. And you cannot separate those things when you're thinking families. It's a full unit and a full meal deal. So anyway, and it was really, really hot and really, really muggy. And I was really, really glad to come back here. And oh yeah, I talked a lot about outdoor nature-based pre-K and how we use our sites. We also talked about our facilities funds and things that we're doing again to increase access for kids and for families across the state. And a lot of people are jealous. So that always makes us feel proud. Thanks for letting me share. If anyone has questions, please wonder.
Will
you so
this,
much.
oh, sorry, Lois, will this meeting stay top secret, Senator Claire Wilson? Are you going to communicate it to, I don't know, the state, to providers, to people to know that?
Well, you know, I did a big post on LinkedIn, and I did one on my social media, you know, but I know the entire world's not connected to that. And it'll go out also, you know, when I do my next e-news. We're in interim right now. I just spent the last week in prisons, and I'll tell you, talking early childhood is much a better answer to our prison system than anything else. So, but if there's, you know, if there's something, I have something I put out. If anybody wants a copy or a link, would be happy if you want to add it to a newsletter or whatever that you've got. Can you shoot me an email, and I would be happy to connect you with my PIO, and we can do that.
Awesome.
I'm always, yeah, you always think you do what you can, but I'd love to share that with others.
Yeah, I think that would be great for
Awesome.
any provider to share on their Instagram feed or their personal feeds.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
And you can always friend me. Look for me on Facebook or Instagram too, because it's on my Senate page.
Thank you.
And I see in the chat that Eric said, thank you. that Eric said he's planning to send a news tip to the comms team. So that would be a wonderful interview for the comms team of you and the rest of the delegation to be able to share out
Yes.
the entire world, because it seems like all the subjects you touched on, it sounds like JR a little bit, child welfare, early learning, just a little bit of everything. So I think it would be really good to be able to let folk know the other part of the hard work that you're doing to support families and providers in our state, Senator Wilson.
You know what?
One
I
of the
just,
questions I have,
Yeah.
oh, go
I would-
ahead. We're all
no.
excited.
Yeah, you know,
I just wanted to,
yeah, I just will say, you know, the only other thing is, I think I'm just so blessed because I do chair human services in the Senate, and that covers all child welfare, all juvenile justice, all DSHS, and all Department of Corrections outside of the judicial. So all about the wraparound services and supports. And then when you mirror that or add that to early learning K-12, it really is whole children and whole families. And to be able to have both of those, I think, is critically important. And so, you know, try to be at least someone who speaks to the whole. Anyway, so I really appreciate the time this morning.
yeah, kudos to you. I was also going to say kudos for you for taking it and having an intersectional lens, because you said it did. There's a gender bias there. Mothers, single mothers, I bet, which is, you know, what the home that I grew up on, are extremely affected. And then racially, which mothers are extremely affected. So that's so beautiful. Thank you. Inspirational.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Wilson. I have one final question, and then our wonderful RA leader, Enrica, said that we probably should still give people about 5 minutes. So I know Carol is coming on, and Carol, sorry to dig into your time, but we'll go a little bit longer. But I have a question about, you know, with Washington State, we're going to have a change in the way our portable background checks are processed. So I'm just curious if any other states in that staff have to be completely cleared before they can enter the classroom, which is something that has been around for a while from the feds, and our state, because of the way our system is, has been asking for an exemption, and the feds are telling us exemption time is gone. Were there any other states that are facing that same issue? And if so, how are they dealing with it? And that might be a longer question than you might have time for, but
you know, we
you
did
can
not talk
just-
about that, but Lois, if you want to send an email, what I can do is I have access to National Council of State Legislators and my own policy staff. And first thing they do is dig into what other states might be doing. But that did not come up as a conversation in this short time we had together, really talking about, you know, those other three areas. But clearly, it is an area, and we have, you know, we have said, you know, we can't wait that long because people are gone by the time, you know, we're waiting. Anyway, did not come up in this conversation.
Okay, well, I know Susan is on for our Seattle-based coalition, but I'm sure there are others that have those same questions. So we'll maybe talk offline, and I'll be in touch, or Susan will be on our behalf. Thank you, Senator Wilson. We are going to come back at 11:35. Eric, if you would be so kind as to let Carol know. And we'll come back at 11:35 and begin to talk about a little bit more about racial equity and social justice, which fits right in line with Senator Wilson's share out. And thank you so much, Senator Wilson. We'll see everybody back at 11:35.
It looks like it's 11:35. So welcome back, everyone. We're going to, oh, thank you, Eric. It looks like Carol actually is not here yet. Eric, do you know when we might expect Carol to join?
I do not have a good answer for that.
Okay.
We're just trying to coordinate and connect with her. I'm wondering if something came up that maybe we're not aware of. So I guess if we could have a minute or two to see if we can have a little better idea when she can get here. That was a horrible answer. I know I danced around everything right there as best I could.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. And actually, while you're trying to get some feedback there, I know that Lois has just texted me saying that Genevieve is here and wanted to take a few minutes to share some news with the group. So perhaps we can use the time now for that. Genevieve? Oh, I think you might be muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Genevieve Stokes. I am the Senior Government Affairs Advisor here at DCYF, a Senior Government Affairs Advisor. And my portfolio covers all of our early learning division, as well as all of our licensing division and our administrative services divisions. And I just wanted to let folks know who haven't already heard that I am leaving DCYF in 2 weeks. And I will be going over to Child Care Aware of Washington to be their political director to work on the expanded access and living wage campaign there, which is very exciting. And I wanted to make a plug that my position at DCYF is going to be, or is open right now. I will plop the link to the job here in the chat for folks. Definitely, if anyone has questions about like, what is this job, I'm happy to answer them. I'm really hoping that they get someone 10 times better than me in this position to take over for me, and know that the portfolio may change a little. It'll definitely keep early learning, but whether or not it keeps the 1,000 other random things that I do is up in the air. But if folks could help spread the word about that position, it's a senior position. Eventually we will have or DCYF will have a position underneath that is more of a junior advisor working on early learning things. So if someone's like, I'm not sure, like just know that there's another position coming up. And also I look forward to joining ELAC going forward as a stakeholder. I've already told Erin that I'm going to ask her 1,000 annoying questions. And so you're not getting rid of me, but yeah. And I'll put my future email in the chat here. That was it.
Well, thank you, Genevieve, for sharing that. And wow, I'm moving to Child Care Aware Washington as the political director. Very, very lucky to have you there. And great. Thank you also for putting your contact information in the chat. That is really helpful. Congratulations. So I'm going to check back in with Eric really quickly just to see if there are any updates about Carol. Otherwise, perhaps we might be able to possibly pivot to the childcare access and living wage if Carol is not available.
Yes, actually, that's what I was hoping you might suggest that we do just shift over a little early. Although I don't know if Nicole's team is here yet. And I did give her a quick ping. I have not heard back whether or not she can step in early.
And
Okay.
Eric, if they can't, I can always pitch hit on that.
I would love that. That
Oh,
would be great, I think. Yeah, if you can.
okay, that
Yeah.
is
And
great.
then we
Thank
can
you.
just kind of fill in and figure it out here from that would be great. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have the slide deck, Eric?
Yeah, I'm gonna see if Jess can you pull that up and forward into Genevieve's portion.
Great. Thank you so much, Genevieve.
Okay, I'm just letting Nicole know that I'm going to pitch it so she's not surprised.
Okay.
Thank goodness for Zoom chat. Okay.
Yeah.
So bear with me. I did help out on the slides, but basically I'm just sort of pitch hitting right now. So the legislature included a proviso. Eric, maybe you can help remind me. We've floated this topic to ELAC and at the last meeting, right? Or is this the first time they're hearing about it?
Yeah, that's correct. We have this topic has been discussed before. Yeah.
Very
Okay.
briefly.
So
Yeah, very briefly.
just as a reminder, we're going to talk about a proviso that came through the legislature this year that we're really excited about. We think it's really important work, and sort of talk through how this fits in with everything that we're doing and where ELAC can provide input and partnership. So, and Nicole will join in a few moments here. So just as a reminder, we call this like the bubbles of children slide, that this sort of gives y'all a sense of the total sort of universe of children that exist and where they're sort of served. So there's nearly 2 million children in Washington, 1.2, I mean, excuse me, 1.2 million children in Washington, birth through age 12 at sort of any given time. We know that about 64% of those have all the caregivers in the home are like working. And you can see here that, you know, a portion of those, a small portion really, are served by licensed care. An even smaller portion, if you think 1.2 million total, we have about 42,000 that are served by subsidized care, even though we know there's about nearly 800,000 families that need care because all caregivers are working in the home. This just sort of, we like to reground of like, what is the scale of child care needs in the state? So if you go to the next slide, the legislature is aware that there is a crisis that has been going on in childcare for a number of years. The legislature in Washington state has done amazing things to help fund some relief, particularly over the last couple of years. And it's been really helpful in stabilizing the market, but it hasn't solved the crisis. And so they tasked DCYF with submitting an implementation plan to them to expand access to Washington's mixed delivery childcare system. And effectively, this plan has to incorporate two main things. It has to incorporate that families don't pay more than 7% of their income for care, which is something you heard reiterated by Senator Wilson in her DC conversations as the sort of national sort of policy trend, and that the workforce are provided living wage and benefits. So the plan has to incorporate those things. You'll see here that we were also tasked with a few other things where it says follow the intent of Chapter 199 Laws of 2021. It's just a wonky way of saying that like we have to follow the intent of the Fair Start for Kids Act, even though we may need to change some of the policies, right, to expand eligibility, et cetera. It basically grounds us in the cost of care rate model. So whatever rate that comes up with, that's the rate we need to be paying, because that's going to incorporate living wage and benefits into that. And then it needs to, this plan, I think the legislature was really serious about this being an implementation plan, not a set of recommendations of like, wouldn't it be nice? So we have to have timelines, costs, we need to have like the list of laws that need to be changed in order to actually make this plan work in totality. And then it's tasked with us working with the CCA and SEIU and to consult with families in development of this plan. So that's just sort of a background on the proviso itself. And then we have a little bit of information on how this all fits together. And just like a good tap dancer, I am going to hand it over to Nicole, who has shown up early. Thank you, Nicole, to take it from here.
Yeah, thank you all. And I thank you for letting me know you needed me early. And thank you, Genevieve, for pinch hitting. I just got on, so I want to make sure I'm up to speed with where we're at. And I think, Genevieve, you've just gone over this part of the proviso, correct?
Yep. And so I think we can go to the next slide and you can take it from there.
Great. Thank you.
You see that?
So, okay. Yep. So I think one of the things that we really want to do as we're doing this work is really take a look at the work that has happened to date and talk about how all of this really fits together. And so this is our way of trying to depict these puzzle pieces that are all coming together to really get towards that implementation plan that Genevieve talked about, of an early care and education access plan and living wage plan. And so just wanting to acknowledge that Fair Start for Kids Act has been foundational. As we talked about in executive committee today, there's some work that has started with Fair Start for Kids Act that we will continue to build on. And in fact, the cost of care rate model is one of those pieces. And now this living wage proviso. And so as we're thinking about this, one of the things that we're trying to do is say, how do we describe what this looks like? And so as you look at the words on here, and I'll read them out loud to you, would really just appreciate any reaction or feedback you have as you think about, is this the right vision and the right statement for what we're hoping to accomplish in Washington State? And so as we think about fitting all these pieces together, we want to create an integrated mixed delivery system of affordable, high quality care and education for all of Washington's children, birth to 12 years old, that achieves child outcomes and supports family well-being regardless of race or income, and that all families will have true choice for care, and providers will have the resources to recruit and retain a thriving workforce so they can meet the needs of children and families. And so I see Angelia is asking if we have a working definition of mixed delivery. And so when we talk about a mixed delivery system in Washington State, what we're really saying is that we have early care and education that happens in a variety of settings. That may happen in a licensed family home. It might happen in a child care center. It might happen in a school, and that all of those things are really important to making sure that we can serve all of Washington's children and families. It might also mean that ECAP happens in a licensed family home or center or school setting. And so when we talk about mixed delivery, that is the vision there. And then there's a question here about the definition of high quality early care and education. So in Washington State, we have defined high quality early care and education through our quality rating and improvement system, Early Achievers. And so when we talk about quality, that's really the framework that we are looking at. So that includes things like the learning environment, adult-child interactions, high quality curriculum, what is family engagement look like? So we really go back to, if we were putting all of the puzzle pieces together to the way back in 2014, 15, 15, 16, the Early Start Act, when we really said in Washington State, we have foundational quality licensing standards, and then early achievers is our framework for quality. I think one of the great things about early achievers recently is that there's been a lot of work done with providers and others, is we have kept the same standards, but have really worked with providers on how providers can show their progress through those standards with a racial equity lens. So, and Jen's question is, does mixed delivery include license exempt programs? So we do have license exempt family, friend, and neighbor providers that do provide care in Washington State. And as we think about access across the whole entire continuum, we do recognize that there are families who are using license exempt providers. And Angelia, I see your comment about the unintended consequences when we use the term mixed delivery. It would be great if you want to put in chat more about that. And others, if there are terms other than mixed delivery that you think would resonate more. Okay, so Susan has a question about how does transitional kindergarten factor into fitting all of the pieces together? And I'll answer this question, and then we can go on to the next slide, because we're going to have some time. We really want to get to the space where you all get to have some conversation and provide some input. So Susan, I think it's a great question. And when we think about serving all of Washington's children, birth to 12 years old, that's the scope of what we're talking about here, and transition to kindergarten, is in that pre-K space. And we do need to look at things like not only transitional kindergarten, but also our families who are receiving special education services, who may be in developmental preschool. We need to look at our licensed childcare providers. We do need to look across that whole space to see where families may be going, to understand how we can phase in an implementation plan. And so we do see transitional kindergarten as one puzzle piece as we try to fit all the pieces together as we think about early care and education access. I think the other thing that I would say to that point too is, as we look at that cost model and some other pieces, it's really important for us to understand how we are looking at funding across infants, toddlers, and preschoolers as well. As we know that preschoolers are often helping to fund some of our infant and toddler classrooms, and that cost of care work becomes really, really important here as we think about what is needed for infants, toddlers, and preschoolers. So I think if you have other thoughts or comments about what resonates or doesn't resonate with you about this kind of draft vision statement, please feel free to put them in the chat. And I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next slide. So this slide is showing us a timeline of how all of these pieces fit together, and is just trying to acknowledge all of the work that is happening now and how it is leading us into decision package requests and recommendations that DCYF needs to submit to the legislature. Many of you know that the Child Care Collaborative Task Force completed a cost model, and we are really building on that, taking a look at that, and doing some rate model development with our early educators design team that had already started. And then we had the passage of the Early Care Education Access and Living Wage Proviso. So that work is beginning now and has started in July. We're having conversations with you all, with Child Care Aware and SEIU. Then we will work on a new cost survey to make sure we meet our federal timeline for the 2024 CCDF plan. And then you see there's lots of activity in fall of 2024 where we're really looking at what have we learned from the cost model conversations, what is the recommendation that the design team is making there, and using that to inform our decision package that goes to our governor's office, working on submitting our rate model to the feds for approval. And then we will also want to submit a progress report on our early care and education access and living wage proviso, just so that folks know where we are in the process, because that plan is due in June of 2025. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So this is a place where we want to have some discussion and feedback, and we do have a Jamboard link, and I do see some of the comments in here around, seems like we're saying we have a cafeteria style selection for families, and if TTK is part of the puzzle, they don't believe that the vision statement applies. If TTK is part of the puzzle, since high quality standards don't apply to TTK. And what I would say is, as you have the opportunity to go on the Jamboard, if you want to share more about those things, you know, the legislation that passed around TTK does talk about some of the quality elements that are required. And I think, you know, to the comment around the cafeteria style, if I'm capturing that correctly, I think what we're saying is that right now, families might not have true choice based on what's available in their area. And we want to make sure that families have access to the services that best meet their needs. And that's part of what we hope to think through with you all as we think about what this implementation plan would look like. So we have a Jamboard link here, and I want to check in because I believe it's my understanding that often we want to do things and have time in the larger group in ELAC related to the Jamboard, but if you all would like to do small groups, you're welcome to do that as well. But this is really the time that we want to hear from you all around a couple of different things. You know, how do you suggest we reach out to families and providers about this work? What questions should we be asking of families and providers to guide our planning? What is most important to you from the child and family perspective, and really from the provider perspective as we think about early care and education access? And then what should DCYF consider as we think about living wages? And so I see in the chat there's a question about thriving wage and benefits, and I think we're still using the term living wage and benefits, but I'm just going to look and see who all is here from the design team, if anyone wants to weigh in on that. And Debbie, maybe your question is, are there highlights from the design team that can be shared? And I would need to, Matt and Jason have been leading that work, and I do not have highlights with me today, but I can certainly go back and get those. So I want to clarify something, and then Angelia, I want to go to your comment, and then really do want to give you all time to have an opportunity to provide some input on these questions. So let me say, when we think about transitional kindergarten, part of where the thinking is on that is that we know we have children and families who are choosing to go to transitional kindergarten. And so as we think about an implementation plan to meet the needs of all kids and families that need access to care, it seems like we need to take into consideration what are all of the places a child and family might be going right now to access that care as we think about the number of slots that are needed and spaces, number of providers, et cetera. And so I don't know, Lois and others who are asking about TK, if that resonates with you or if you have some further comments there. Hi, Lois.
Hi, Nicole. So, Nicole, my question is this: since this is our DCYF plan, and you're right about, families being served through TK, but it's not really something that we can really weigh in on quality and what is being offered, since they are, that's been really clear with the legislation, that separation between the two agencies. So I'm just curious as to should it even be included in our plan, or maybe using that term transitional kindergarten is not the correct way to describe it. I'm just kind of thinking in a thought bubble, but that's what comes to mind when I see that piece.
Nicole, this is Genevieve. I might just throw out, Lois, that I think if you go back to the language in the proviso, it's looking at really like access for all families. And I think our plan needs to account for where all the families are at any given point along that birth to 12 spectrum. And we have to recognize that some families, when their child is 4 years old, will be in that transition to kindergarten program. And so our plan has to ensure that we're accounting for that. And I think it also has to really ensure that that doesn't have deleterious effects on the business model for providers for all the other age groups, which is something that I think is a big concern right now, that if the 4-year-olds are being pulled out into TTK, then it hurts the business model for all the other age groups that a provider serves. So I think the plan has to say, okay, some of these kids are going to be there, and how do we ensure that that doesn't hurt the business of the childcare such that they can't offer living wage and they don't provide access. So that's why we have to account for it in the plan so that we can make sure that the providers stay whole, even though that is happening. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And this is something we actually do in state-funded pre-K right now. We take a look at the variety of other options that are available for families so that we can understand where there may be a desert or sort of what is happening in that community, so that we can be thoughtful about where spots are placed. And I see Senator Wilson's on, and just also want to acknowledge, as we think about this, how do we continue to think about collaboration and going back and looking at some of the language in that in the TK bill, which does have a focus on developmentally appropriate curriculum and high quality programs. But Senator Wilson, I want to give you an opportunity to weigh in here as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, by all means, the legislation is based on funding source, and one comes out of DCYF and the other comes out of OSPI. That does not mean there's not interaction between the two. And I've sat at many a table between OSPI and DCYF in conversation around TK and the guidelines and standards. And the draft guidelines just came out. The rulemaking just came out, as a matter of fact, that will guide TK for this school year while finalized rulemaking is going on. And quality very much is a part of our state and has been for a long time. Right now, access is an issue, but unlike other states, we have focused on quality first and now access. And so there's a lot of things that you'll see that are cross-system, cross-sector in that way. And I'll also say we have incredible deserts and extreme deserts in rural areas that have never had and will for a long time not have enough density of children to actually have childcare centers, if you will. And so the school is oftentimes that center space. And so just believe we also have to really look at our infant toddler rates as we think about the intent versus the impact, which Lois is huge for me, because as we think about our cost of care and the true cost of care for, 4 infants to 2 adults does not a business model make. And when we're actually providing families with choice, if you will, just like we did when we went from half day K to full day K, we also have to look at how much we're paying providers to do the work, which is why that cost of quality, but also your living wage budget proviso work is so critically important as we move this forward. So it's an and both, and they work together, and it is a menu of service and support that's driven by families and needs across our state.
Senator Wilson, there's a couple of comments in the chat or questions. And so one question was, is this a feedback opportunity being guided by a liberatory design process? So one of the things I want to know is we are just starting the process around discussion and feedback and scoping of the work. And so we've had an initial conversation at provider support, asking some similar questions, and are working to bring some staff on to support this work, and we'll be working out sort of what are all the opportunities for different feedback loops throughout this process. And we do want to be thinking about the liberatory design principles and the principles that are being used by some of the design work group as we look at the cost study as well. So we're getting started. I was really wanting to honor some feedback that we had received previously about coming to these groups early, even if we don't have everything worked out, to just get some initial thinking. And then there was another question in here that's maybe about the design group, and then maybe started for Jen around, was there a discussion around the educator's ability to have less direct contact time with students, like a 6 or 7 hour contact day, but more time for planning and other related tasks? And so I don't know, Jen, if you can answer that in chat, or if you want to come off mute. And then Lois and Ida, I want to make sure that we've resolved your questions. Also, because I see your hands are still up.
I just had a statement in regards to the transitional kindergarten intent and the overall impact, right, to early learning. I'm a part of the committee, the OSPI committee, in regards to transitional kindergarten, and their intent was always to provide these transitional kindergarten opportunities for children who haven't had the socio-emotional development or already participating in an early learning program. And most school districts have honored that. And once they realize a child's already attended a high quality program, they basically don't qualify for TK. But I recognize this year within my school district, it's kind of pivoted. And based on what Senator Wilson just acknowledged, that most rural areas either don't have enough children to be able to facilitate a classroom, right, of transitional kindergarten, which we saw a very large decrease within my school district here in Whatcom County, city of Blaine to be specific, a decrease. So what they've done is the children who attend my program who are special needs or have an individual education plan or IEP, they've rolled them into transitional kindergarten with the intent of following their IEP. So now they can't deny them into transitional kindergarten based on already attending an early achievers high quality program based on their disabilities and their IEP. So there's been loopholes that have been embedded into transitional kindergarten that ultimately do impact early learning programs because, you know, let's be real, we're losing kids a lot sooner. And I love the fact that they were honoring that at the beginning, but now that loophole based on enrollment has now began to negatively impact programs. I'm the only family childcare in the city of Blaine right now standing, and we have 3 centers. Enrollment is low across the city, right? So they've been creative on utilizing transitional kindergarten now to be that developmental preschool outlet, and that's full day school. So anyways, I just want to highlight that there's things happening in the back end of OSPI. I don't think that was their intention, but the school is basically helping meet the needs of their community to a certain aspect, but it does negatively impact early learning to some contexts. I just thought I'd share that.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think, certainly happy to connect with OSPI. I know that they have come and given written updates. It may also be good at some point for us just to clarify or put in the feedback loop what all is in the legislation as it relates to rulemaking around enrollment and connecting and doing community needs assessments and those types of things. So that is being.
I was just going to say, I'm a representative from OSPI, Early Learning Program Supervisor at OSPI. And so with that being said, I wanted to let you know rulemaking has been posted for TTK. The temporary ruling is in place for now, and then we're moving into permanent rulemaking. And high quality care is definitely, on the top of our list as well. And so that's why it's been good to be able to establish, more, I would say, defined rules around the program. And we have also been in collaboration with DCYF with recruitment, enrollment. So we're talking to each other and we're collaborating. So it's not in isolation. And we have to work together in order to serve all our families. It's about serving the families and the children. And so we're definitely, at the table to have those conversations to make sure that we're being thoughtful as much as possible. So I just want to let you know that, yes, current rulemaking has been established and it is posted. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Letitia. That was very helpful.
Nicole's back. I was gonna say, I
Yeah,
know Nicole was restarting in there.
Yeah, I haven't left yet. I was gonna try and I get you all started on some conversation here. And one of the takeaways I have from this is it would be helpful to have a conversation on transitional kindergarten. So emergency rules are in place. I think it's important to know that now, and that larger rulemaking is coming down the line. And as Letitia shared, DCYF and OSPI will be in conversation related to that, because there are specific things that DCYF and OSPI need to work on together. As far as early achievers, there are quality elements in transitional kindergarten that match up with the quality elements in early achievers, but they are not required to participate in that process. So I want to go back, Genevieve. It looks like you might have something to say, but what I was going to say is I really would like an opportunity for you all to provide some input on the Jamboard on these questions. And so I'm not sure if I actually haven't gone in the Jamboard to see if it's happening yet. I don't know if you want to do that in a large group or small group. I'm also not sure, given the fact that we've had a change in timing here, how much time we have left for this. But Genevieve, I'll let you weigh in, and then maybe Eric on the other pieces around how much time we have.
And Nicole, I actually just put in the chat, you have take all the time that you need. It looks like, at least right now, we have not heard back from Carol. If that changes, I'll definitely let you know. But for now, just take the time that you need. We do end at 1 today, so.
Thank you.
Nicole, I was just going to ask about timing as well. And then are you wanting folks to just on their own, or are you asking for folks to go into small groups to do the Jamboard?
I'm asking what this group would prefer, if they want to do it on their own or if they want an opportunity to go into small groups to look at these questions.
So small groups.
Welcome back, everyone. I think we've got everybody back from their collective Zoom rooms. I saw lots of activity on the Jamboard, and I'm just so appreciative of the comments on here and the ideas, and want to acknowledge that these are conversations that we've been having for quite some time around how do we really think about early care and education and access, and significant investments have been made and we've still got some ways to go. And so I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation with you all as we work towards that implementation plan. I want to just provide space if there are groups that want to share out anything that was sort of on top for them as they were looking through the questions that you want to make sure that this group hears or that you want to share more about.
Nicole, how long is this, the Jamboard going to be up for those members who had to pop off or that type of thing? Can we have a little bit more time? And if so, how long? So CE can send it out to folk?
Yeah, you can absolutely have more time. And I would really turn to this group to see what makes sense. Does middle of August work? Do you want 1 week, 2 weeks? I'm open on this.
Nicole, are you presenting the same information at provider supports next week?
That is a good question. We did a similar exercise with them at a previous provider supports meeting, and I'm going to ask Eric to help me remember if this is on the agenda for the next provider supports or if we're doing a different topic.
This is the topic with the exception, I think, of PDG. I think it has a PDG component to it.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we could, Lois, are you thinking maybe we keep it open past then?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's what I was thinking. So it would end up being at least, well, it might end up being 3 weeks for ELAC and 2 weeks for provider supports. But or a week for provider supports unless it's sent out earlier. But just, you know, trying to give the groups enough time, because you said the middle of August, they meet next week, which is the 8th.
Yeah.
So that would give ELAC 2 weeks and it would give them a week, but we 1 week, but we also want to make sure we're giving you enough time.
Yeah, and you know, as you're saying that, I have another wondering that I would pose to this group. Often what we've done is we do a separate Jamboard link for the next meeting, just so we can see what came from ELAC and what came from provider supports. And I would just appreciate any advice or guidance you have on whether that's the right direction to go, or if it's helpful to have the same link so that folks can see what was shared in one meeting and can build on it.
Nicole, this is Susan. I would say the same link, because if I'm gonna update or change or, you know, it's like hard to remember what you wrote before. So that's how I feel about it.
Thanks, Susan. And I seen Colleen put in the chat. So maybe if you all want to maybe just put in the chat your thoughts, that would be great. And if we need to keep it open through that more towards the end of August, that's okay as well, or maybe the third week in August, so it gives provider support some time as well. All right. Was there anyone who wanted to share things that you all discussed in your group or expand on anything?
I'll go ahead and share. I'll lower my hand. So Astrid Newell, a couple of things that emerged toward the end of our conversation were one, there's already been a lot of input on these questions from families, providers, and others, and just making sure that we're building on things that have already been collected rather than continually asking families and providers to provide the same information again. And then we also talked about the Child Care Collaborative Task Force reports and all of the recommendations and that were generated over a significant period of time, and making sure that we're really tying things to work that has already been done. Thanks.
Thanks, Astrid. And I think I appreciate that, and part of it sounds like we can do a better job of saying we will build on these existing things where feedback and recommendations have been given, and maybe checking in with, you know, what are some things that are maybe top of mind now? Would you reprioritize some of these things? So making sure we're really acknowledging that and making space for any new information or thoughts that folks have. Thank you, appreciate that. Any thoughts or comments from others? Just checking the chat as well. Oh, thanks for that, Colleen. We'll make sure to work with OSPI to get that updated. So one of the things I'm hearing as some concrete next steps are to leave this open until middle to 3 weeks into August. I think most folks were saying having the same link used in both ELAC and provider supports was helpful to be able to build off of and see what others were thinking, and to build on that work. And then also really want to make sure that we're pulling in any of the recommendations, anything that we've received from families prior around what do we know around access and the living wage work that's happening, even in the design work group, as we move this work forward, to check in and say, are these still the right things? Are there things that you would update? And so I've heard those 3 things, and want to check in if there's anything else on that. Then I want to come back to the OSPI and transitional kindergarten work as we close out.
Nicole, I was going to ask, I don't know if this is already your process, but as the team, the DCYF team creates the work plan, is it a regular practice that you track where thoughts and ideas and suggestions come from within the plan, like ELAC or the providers group or other stakeholders? I wasn't sure.
You know, that's a great question, Debbie. And I think that is sometimes buried. And some of that is because we will go back to individual groups and say, here's the feedback we received and put that back out there. But I can see the value in saying, here are the recommendations, here's the groups that they came from that help show, I think, who we've connected with and where those ideas came from. So we can think about a way to do that. Okay. The one last thing I just wanted to touch base on is I know that I think every time we get the opportunity to connect and interact, there's lots of great conversation about how we're meeting the needs of kids and families and the work that OSPI and DCYF are doing in that space as it relates to transitional kindergarten and others. And so, you know, happy to connect with Letitia and Samantha around when might be a good time to come back and have some joint conversation about the work and the work that's happening there, in particular as we move into our work related to coordinated recruitment and enrollment and some of the other things that the agencies have been working on. So we'll connect with colleagues at OSPI and our co-chairs and others about the right timing for that conversation.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Nicole and Genevieve. I think Genevieve had to pop off. So Nicole, please tell her thank you for contending. And it worked out because we still ended up having more of a robust conversation. So that was good. Oh, you are still there. Okay. I thought you had to pop off at 12. So thank you, Genevieve. I am going to turn this over to Enrica and she will wrap us up. Thanks all.
Thank you, Lois, and thank you again, Nicole and Genevieve, especially for jumping in there early when we didn't have our other presenter. Much appreciated. But thank you, everyone. As we're preparing to wrap up the meeting, you'll notice that Jessica put a link in the chat just so we can get some feedback about how you felt today's meeting went for you. So if you could take a moment and click on that link and provide some feedback, that would be great. And maybe Eric, you can let me know when you start to see the feedback waning, and then I will move on with some final updates.
You got it. I think we have about 10 responses, but it does appear to be slowing down.
Okay, great. So we'll just keep moving forward here, but everyone feel free to enter your feelings about today's meeting using that link. Just some final thoughts. Our next meeting is a report development executive session meeting that is scheduled for Tuesday, August 15th. I believe that will be from 9 to noon. And then the next public meeting is scheduled for October the 3rd. So just thank you, everyone, for sharing of your expertise and giving of your time and the good discussion that we've had today. And enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you, everyone.